Nothing ever happens in West Memphis, Arkansas.
We've had 3 children missing since last night.
3 young boys murdered in cold blood.
It appeared that they had been sexually mutilated.
Is it your opinion that these crimes were motivated by occult beliefs?
Yes.
Arrested at 2:44 p.m., charged with 3 counts of capital murder.
It was like a nuclear bomb going off in the courtroom.
Life imprisonment without parole. Death by lethal injection.
And the terror of mortal men look favorably on my sacrifice.
Okay.
Where were these found, guys?
Green one on the left side there, red one on the right side.
231. 231. Don't let nobody come up here. Don't want nobody in here.
Good evening, I'm Diana Davis.
And I'm Tony Brooks. In a statement given to the police and obtained by a Memphis newspaper, 17-year-old Jesse Miskelly allegedly confesses to watching 2 other suspects choke, rape, and sexually mutilate 3 West Memphis second graders. Jenna Newton reports.
According to the published report, Miskelly told police he watched 18-year-old Damien Echols and 16-year-old Jason Baldwin brutalize the children with a club and a knife. The report says Miskelly told police Echols and Baldwin raped one of the boys and sexually mutilated another as part of a cult ritual. Miskelly is quoted as saying he did not take part in the rape and mutilation, but that he helped subdue one victim who tried to escape. At a press conference, Inspector Gary Gitchell said the case against the accused teens is very strong.
Scale of 1 to 10, how solid do you think the case is?
11.
It appears satanic worship may have played a role in the murders. Since the very beginning of the investigation, people all around West Memphis have come forward with stories of satanic cults.
Reverend Tommy Stacy's church is down the street from where the bodies were found. 1 year ago, Damien Echols told the church's youth minister he had a pact with the devil and he was going to hell.
Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to be revisiting a topic I covered when I first started making videos here, and that is the case of the West Memphis Three. I want to start out by apologizing for the graphic images at the start of this video. I really didn't know if I was going to include them, but in the end I decided I was going to because I wanted to remind people just what's at stake when it comes to this case, and how often the deaths of those kids are overlooked as a result of everyone arguing about the guilt or innocence of the 3 men who were accused. And I truly don't think that really anything I could have said would have been able to make it clearer than those images.
Christopher never hurt anybody. He had a gentle, loving, and giving heart. And they crucified him in those woods. And they humiliated his little body. They took his little manhood before he even knew what it was. And I hate him for it. I've never hated anybody in my life. And I hate these 3. And the mothers that bore them.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with the case, I've left some links in the description that go over this case in its entirety. But to briefly summarize, the West Memphis Three were 3 teenagers convicted in 1994 for murdering 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. The case was, to put it mildly, controversial, and thousands of people all over the world firmly believed that the West Memphis Three were actually innocent and had been convicted as a direct result of them being goth and wearing black clothing and listening to heavy metal music and just being the creepy kids that were a thing in the 1990s in a town full of overly religious people.
I do know that my youth director talked to Damien extensively after revival that we had, and he told him that he could not be saved, that he could not give his heart to Jesus. And my youth director then tried to get him to take a Bible, and he made the statement that he could not take a Bible because if he did, the rest of them would get him.
The West Memphis Three got a ton of support, some from even really well-known celebrities, and they were able to hire a defense team that mounted a very compelling case that the three were in fact innocent. And after having spent 20 years in prison, it looked like the three were going to be granted a new trial. But before that trial could happen, they were offered something called an Alford plea, which would allow the three to leave prison if they pled guilty while they maintained their innocence.
Jason Baldwin, Damien Echols, and Jesse Miskelly are free men today, known as the West Memphis Three. They were just teenagers when they went to prison for killing 3 little boys nearly 20 years ago. They always insisted they were innocent. Now they are out, thanks to a highly unusual plea deal in which they admit guilt. It was a bitter pill. CNN's David Mattingly has our report.
After more than 18 years behind bars, the men known as the West Memphis Three find that freedom has a bitter taste.
This was not justice. In the beginning, we told nothing but the truth that we were innocent, and they sent us to prison for the rest of our lives for it. And then we had to come here, and the only thing that the state would do for us was to say, hey, we'll let you go, only if you admit guilt. And that's not justice, no matter how you look at it.
The whole Alford plea thing is honestly kind of horrifying, seeing that if they were in fact innocent, they were falsely imprisoned for years, and an actual killer was allowed off scot-free just because the state didn't want to pay them restitution for having falsely convicted them. Or, even worse, the state was releasing child murderers because of public pressure. One of the men, Damien Echols, was actually facing the death penalty, so the three were basically forced into taking a plea deal to get out of jail and avoid being executed. This case is probably the most controversial case I've ever covered, and over the years, though it's kind of faded, the three were out of jail. The case had some level of closure, at least for the West Memphis Three it did, and life just seemed to kind of move on. That was until December 21st of 2021, when this happened.
The men accused of murder in that West Memphis Three case may get a second chance to argue their innocence.
Evidence that was said to have been destroyed has actually been found intact, and now they're trying to have it tested for DNA analysis. THV 11's Ashley Godwin explains.
Turns out there's evidence the whole time that could have overturned this conviction, 20 years ago. This is monumental.
Oh yeah, the evidence was there.
After 18 months of fighting to see evidence that was once believed to be destroyed, Damien Echols' legal team got their chance. This week, lawyers were able to comb through it, looking for clues as to what really happened in the case of the West Memphis Three. Some of it included shoelaces that were used to tie up the children.
We certainly want to bring some measure of closure to the families of these 3 children, and of course, hopefully, in that same moment, exonerate Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly.
Now the lawyers are looking to test the evidence for DNA using new technology that wasn't available 10 years ago.
To use what's called the MVAC testing, which is a vacuum procedure that removes whatever DNA is there.
So, I want to begin by saying that the video I made covering the case was focused on the idea that the West Memphis Three might have actually been guilty of the crime. There's tons of videos out there that speak to their innocence, and I wanted there to be another video out there that went into depth about all of the reasons people think they're guilty. I've linked that video in the description of this video, and I'll link it again at the end of this video, but to be honest, the new information that's come out has caused me to reevaluate this case as a whole, because when you're presented with new information, you should always be able to change your view of something. Now, while I'm far from saying that I think that the three are innocent, I do think on the surface that this does support the concept of innocence. Either way, had I been on their jury, I would never have voted to have convicted the three. There just wasn't enough evidence that was presented at the trial to do that. But there's a big difference between being not guilty and being innocent. There's really a lot to unpack here, and I think a really good place to start is with this.
Also this week, West Memphis Police Chief Mike Pope will resign. In a letter dated December 7th, but only released to the public this week, he tells the mayor he has other endeavors and goals that are pointing him to a different direction. According to a city spokesperson, Pope's resignation has no relation to the West Memphis Three developments. His last day is tomorrow. In Little Rock, Ashley Godwin, THV 11 News.
So, obviously him stepping down when lawyers found evidence law enforcement claimed was destroyed is a touch suspicious, and to Damien's credit, guilty people don't tend to push for DNA testing that could prove they're guilty. And I just can't stress it enough. I can't imagine a guilty person trying to clear their name at the expense of destroying themselves all over again if there was any chance that their DNA could be found while re-examining the evidence. So, what is MVAC testing, and how could it help this case?
My name is Jared Bradley. I'm the president of MVAC Systems. We have the most innovative and newest wet vacuum-based forensics DNA collection system. This is a tool that they need to have in their arsenal.
Solving a crime for me, as in working with a law enforcement agency, means we get the perpetrators off the streets, bringing closure to families and to victims of crime. The MVAC helps solving crime in several ways. One would be touch DNA. Oftentimes we'll have victims that are grabbed or touched and we can't see the touch DNA, and by using the MVAC we are able to extract that touch DNA so that hopefully we'll get the profile of the perpetrator or the suspect.
So there's a very real possibility that the MVAC system might actually help bring some level of resolution to this case, but this type of testing has been around longer than people think, and it was winning awards back in 2008. So after this new news came out, I started really looking into all of this and examining the idea of Damien trying to prove his innocence, and I couldn't help but notice that things might not exactly be what they appear on the surface. Consider this interview that was done with Damien before the missing evidence was found.
Well, and kind of jumping off that question, and you may have this similar answer, but I mean, what does today mean to you? What did today 10 years ago? What does it mean?
It was really, it's kind, I always think of it as like my second birthday. You know, it was a day of being reborn back into the world. You know, a day that I did not know if it was ever going to come or not. But there was also, you know, we had to take an Alford plea, and we had this constant kind of threat hanging over our head where we had to agree to this 10-year suspended sentence type of thing, where if anything went wrong during that 10-year time period, technically I could have been sent back to death row or at least prison. So there was always that, which makes, you know, today is the end of that. It's over. So it's like this was something for a long time that when I looked at this day, I thought that's the day when I will finally be free of, you know, the state system, the prison apparatus. But now there's so much new stuff going on in the case that even though the 10 years is over, it's been a decade, I'm still not free. Because we have this stuff going on right now where we are, you know, we've been trying for probably the past 2 years to have new DNA testing done in the case, and we're still trying to do that. So in some ways, even though that 10-year period is over, we're still caught in this cycle, still trapped in the system.
Damien doesn't exactly seem to be thrilled about the concept of testing for DNA now, does he? And he even refers to it as keeping him trapped in the system, which is An odd thing to say. He's kind of become a spokesperson for the wrongly convicted. You would imagine he would be the one shouting from the rooftops asking for this kind of testing if he was innocent, because it wouldn't just be about him proving his innocence, it would be about finding the person responsible for murdering those kids. But if you listen to Damien, it's almost as if his legal team were actually the ones who were pushing for this and not necessarily him.
And talk to me about that, because that's why I interviewed your attorney. One of your attorneys originally was this evidence, the crucial evidence, what the little boys were tied with, shoelaces, all that stuff. That's just gone. West Memphis Police Department is saying, oh, there's a fire. And I listened to Jillian's podcast that you were on, and I'm actually talking to her after you. So you said how a reporter had actually FOIA'd all the fires that happened in certain city buildings and found none.
Yes.
Ever since mid-July, when I started doing this story, I've called the police department. I got a call back from them yesterday, and they told me to call the city attorney, which is what Jillian said she's been in. It's just a circle of call this person, call this person.
Yes.
So y'all
Well,
been
at least you're getting that, though. We're not even getting that. Like in the beginning, like I said, we set this process in motion somewhere around 2 years ago. You know, when I got out of prison, one of the reasons that I got out was because they were capable of doing DNA testing after 20 years that they weren't able to do back in 1993. Well, now that technology has advanced even more. So they could do things like they use a kind of technology where they could have taken the ligatures that the children were tied with and used this kind of DNA testing that actually vacuums skin cells out of the ligatures. So the only person's DNA who would be in those knots is the person who tied those knots.
Why would you push so hard to test evidence that you were told was destroyed? Damien's legal team apparently didn't begin to ask to test this evidence until 2 years ago, and he's been out of jail for 10 years, and it appears that he only began to petition to test this evidence after he was told it had been destroyed, and it's not because it took time for that technology to catch up. Like I said, MVAC was winning awards back in '08. Everything I've read points to Damien not seeking these type of tests until after he thought the evidence no longer existed. Now, maybe timelines are just mixed up here and he's being genuine, but I have a difficult time understanding why they would have waited so long to push for this type of testing with so much on the line. He also hints that the evidence might have been destroyed on purpose, which would go along with the narrative that he was railroaded by law enforcement, but most importantly, it would open up the doors for a lawsuit. Here, I'll let you listen for yourself.
But you know, and another thing that I should probably tell you, this will be odd. I have a kind of brain trauma from being in solitary confinement for 10 years. I've actually been working with a neurologist in New York we were doing kind of a test to see, basically they think that long-term solitary confinement has a lot of the same effects on the human psyche that things like, you remember a few years ago, the football players, the concussions that had such long-term effects on their lives afterwards. They think that I have something very, very similar to that due to being in solitary confinement for so long. I lost things like facial recognition, voice recognition. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I will forget what I'm talking about right in the middle of a sentence sometime. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I just forgot what question you asked me.
Oh my God.
In the end, if you aren't open to new evidence changing the way you look at a given topic, then it's confirmation bias. And I can't stress enough just how vital it is that they get this right and carry out these tests as soon as possible. 3 children are dead. Their lives had value. Their killer isn't in jail, and it's very possible 3 more innocent people's lives were destroyed as a result. Or even worse, maybe the public helped free their killers so they could pose for pictures with them while they signed their books. This case is incredibly polarizing. People feel very strongly when they discuss it, and they should. And finally, everyone might get the answers that we all thought might have been impossible. And it's critical that people are open to accepting those answers, regardless of what they turn out to be. If their DNA isn't on the ligatures, then I think that is the closest possible thing that anyone could ask for to exonerate the West Memphis Three. And if that actually happens, I'm going to make a video saying as much. But what happens if they do find their DNA? What about the thousands of people, celebrities, online groups that were responsible for them being set free? What then? Do you really think that the majority of people would accept that after everything that's happened? Because I can't help but feel that they would just find a way to say that law enforcement framed them and planted the DNA. And the worst part is that the Arkansas Police Department has been so corrupt here that they would actually have a valid argument. Regardless of what the results are, whether Damien is genuinely seeking to prove his innocence or he accidentally shot himself in the foot here, I can't believe that something like this was allowed to happen. I hope that the public doesn't let this drop and that it eventually turns into a stepping stone for a full-scale investigation of the West Memphis Police Department and its court systems. Guilty or innocent, there's no excuse for the people who are sworn to protect us to intentionally hide or misrepresent evidence because they think it's possible it might make them look bad. Somehow, their image, their money, was allowed to become more important than finding a child killer. And if people let that go, it's a matter of time before something like this happens again.
And you said closure, and I personally, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't really think justice will ever be served. Where are you with that? I mean, people may say like, oh, if they can do the DNA testing, y'all will finally get justice.
Yes.
Is that true?
That's exactly why I use the word closure instead of justice, because there can be no justice in this case. Justice means to balance, to make right, to restore what was done wrong. You can't do that in this situation. Nothing that happens in this situation is going to bring those 3 children back. Nothing that happens in this situation is going to give me or the other 2 men convicted 20 years of our lives back.
And with that being said, thank you so much for watching.